Hello and welcome to Sit Couch Talk video.
Wow.
We did not make it far.
You couldn't even hold a straight face.
But she started laughing and I lost it. Was going to be straight faced.
Okay, would you like to try again?
Can we get a redo?
Yeah. Ready? Everybody just compose yourself. Breathe.
Come on.
Wow, come on.
If you're laughing, I'm sure I'm going to laugh.
Okay, I'll do the countdown. And Ryeguys, you go, okay? 3, 2, 1.
You can. Hello and welcome to Sit Talk Couch Video Game Logic Fun Time with Nerdfather CJ, Zill, and whatever my name is. Rye, Guy, me.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Good intro.
Today
Exactly how CJ does that.
we are.
Yep.
You know, it's kind of the same, only different, and that's
same,
really the point. Today we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy XIV.
Yep.
The online game. I personally have only played a little bit of it, but CJ has played a lot of it. Nerdfather CJ, I guess.
I mean, whatever.
This guy.
This guy.
And Zill has been starting to get into it, so we got kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, so...
Well, I mean, Zill's been playing for 3 years now? 2 years? How long have we been hanging out?
Well, we haven't been playing it the whole time we've
Yeah.
been hanging out. So, like, 2 years?
Yeah.
Well, I guess, when did Stormblood drop?
Stormblood dropped right after we got into Final Fantasy.
Well,
Because we
yes,
rushed
but
through
how
Heaven's
long
Word and
ago
stuff.
was
I
that?
don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. Right before
Well,
Stormblood.
right, guy. Why don't you explain your experience starting the game compared to like starting a game like World of Warcraft that you love and hate? And while you do that, I'll look up when Stormblood dropped.
So I played it briefly a couple months back. I was really looking for something to kind of get back into the whole MMORPG. Because, like I've said in the previous videos, I have played a lot of World of Warcraft. Having started in Wrath of Lich King, I basically played at least a little bit of every expansion, up to, I think, and including the current expansion. I think I
Battle for
played
Azeroth or whatever?
I think I played the beginning of Battle for Azeroth, that Hodor, before I realized. Yes, that's a thing. Before I realized how much I really didn't like the artifact necklace thing and the gear setup for that, but we'll talk more about what's wrong with that expansion probably in a different series at some point.
Yep.
But I wanted to find something new because one of my bigger issues with World of Warcraft is it was kind of just repetitive to a certain point. I wanted to try something different. And Nerdfather CJ obviously has been playing it for a good while now, and he recommended it to me, so I think I got to level 8 or 10 before I
So you
had
got
other things pull me away and started losing interest with it.
So you participated in most of the starting zone stuff. How did that compare to your other starting zones?
It was honestly fairly similar, in my opinion. That being said, like the slowly working in the adding of abilities to the spell bars as like every game starts, because they're not like here's 20 buttons, just slowly figure it out. They just like slowly add buttons to your rotation for whatever character you choose. And I don't believe I made it far enough to get like a second, I don't remember how it works in that talent tree spec where you specialize or whatever.
So
it is for the character.
Go ahead.
So it uses the job system, which you were an arcanist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you picked the only class that gets to choose a job. All the other ones, there's one job.
Yeah, which is honestly kind of disappointing, I think, personally. But I was really excited about, like, eventually the pugilist would get another job. I don't know what that would be off the top of my head, but that would have been really cool, rather than just monk, as is relevant here. But I mean, the game has definitely changed from when it was first released, and mostly for the better. I would say, like, a large portion for the better. Like, there's only a few things that I kind of wish that they hadn't gone the direction they had, but personally, but yeah. So I mean, the game is definitely rushed on release. They shut down the original 1.0 Final Fantasy XIV, released an official apology to the public and to their player base, and then in less than a year pumped out a second game. Like,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Which makes it so that the original game is kind of in some ways inferior to other MMOs. There were a lot of quality of life stuff that you get that are very basic concepts that were not added to the game until much later. One of them being item comparison. You could not.
No, really?
Yeah, you could not compare a piece of gear that you just looted to a piece of gear you were wearing, unless you had both screens up at the same time.
You had to just manually pinpoint, just like attack, defense.
Yep. So.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah, no, it was pretty crazy. So they added that feature. I don't remember when, but you know, in their credit, they've been working extremely hard to always add new features like that, and always, you know, keep fresh content and fresh story released as quickly as they can. And it's usually enough to where you can pick the game back up for a week or two if you just want to play the story, play through the story stuff, be done, retire the game for a month until they release the next big patch or whatever, and then log back in and enjoy the content. And that's usually kind of how I play, which is why I've been playing since it was released in 2014 and don't have all my jobs maxed and all that stuff, because I let myself get distracted by, like, you know, Batman Arkham Knight and
but it's
many
also
other
a good
games.
way to not burn yourself out on one game, which is kind of what my issue has been in the past, where it's like you get so into the game, you play it, and eventually you're like, I burnt out. I don't want to play. I want to do something new. Whereas instead of taking like little breaks in between the patches and everything is kind of a good idea.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also just enough in the game that, like, you never have to put it down, really. Like, there's a huge crafting system, which you never got to experience, and gathering system that are all fairly unique and a lot more dynamic than any other MMO that I've experienced anyway. Because most MMOs, you pull up your crafting system, you select what you want to craft, and maybe you throw in better or worse quality items depending on the game, and then you hit go, and that's it. In Final Fantasy, you actually have a bar where you interact with the construction of that item, and you have two different bars you're working on. You're working on keeping the quality up of the stuff that you're using, but also trying to increase the quality of the item and a few other odds and ends. And if you can build it high quality, it increases the stats by like a certain percentage, I believe. And so it's a lot more dynamic and interactive of a crafting system and a gathering system than pretty much any other MMO. And that's one of the big reasons that drew me to it and has kept me playing it rather than just signing out and being like, well, I'm done with that first. Because I think it's really fascinating. It's super cool.
It's just there's just so much to that game that sometimes I like that fine line between, like, there's one correct path where you can go off of and do things, and then there's like the Skyrim version where it's like, hey, there's like infinitely more hours worth of random miscellaneous things you could do in a game like that versus the actual main storyline quest. Yeah,
and there's a few really great side quests in Final Fantasy XIV, the most notable being the Manderville quest line, which is in every expansion. Then, of course, they have maybe not necessarily fulfilling side quests in each zone, but there's some really interesting story-based side quests in each zone that I think are usually worth doing. Although the Stormblood ones were kind of a letdown in how much they rewarded. I felt very underwhelmed in the amount of XP that most of the side quests gave in Stormblood.
You had to do them just for the story.
Yeah.
It was not worth doing them for the experience. I think... Yeah. No, they basically gave experience like you were still
level
60 the whole way through.
It's true. No, because at first I was leveling pretty rapidly doing every single quest, and then that just plateaued super hard. But
There are dogs running and doing crazy things over
It's
here.
true,
I'm not
but-
going crazy.
you know, they're little Boston Terriers. They're going to be crazy little things.
Boston's do be terrors. Unless you're from Boston, then don't be offended by that. Or do. I'm not your mother.
How do I get my nerd girlfriend to go on a date with me?
Well, the trick is, step 1, have a girlfriend.
No, I ask her for a D8.
Oh. That works as well.
I shamelessly just ripped that off from my friend who texted it to me just now. I mean, so you only got to level 8, which is roughly halfway through the starting zone, and we already discussed how it's pretty similar to most other MMOs. Do you see yourself coming back to the game at any point once you have the time / inclination to pick up some games again?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. We'll see where. I'll probably wait to see reviews on Shadowbringers. I always want to come back to WoW just because it's so nostalgic for me, and like that. I think I started.
Well, let me stop you right there. The reviews for Shadowbringers, it's hands down the best Final Fantasy in the series so far.
Oh, Shadowlands. God, I don't remember if we had this conversation yet, but it's just the year of the Shadow. It's
Yeah,
like
it's true.
Shadowlands, Shadowbringer, Shadowkeep for Destiny. Like,
I think even ESO had a Shadow something, didn't they? I could be wrong. I don't know. It just seemed like every MMO came out with Shadow something this last year and a half or
they
so.
got really lazy. They're all like, it's just shadows for everybody.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. Everyone has at least one.
Yep. I mean, that's pretty fair, though. Like, there's a lot of other games to be playing, both single player and multiplayer, and you don't have a lot of time with your current occupation during the large chunks of the year.
I walk little puppers for money.
It's true. And you do rather well, so
It's fun.
can't complain too hard. But you have enough time to come and participate in our videos, so you know.
Yes. It's always good. Yeah, the only other thing that really was rough about the whole Final Fantasy, it's like I roughly played maybe like a handful of hours of like Final Fantasy X-2 maybe.
Yeah.
I watched my brother play a lot of it, so I'm a little familiar with some of the races and a little bit of the storyline from those games.
Yeah.
That being said, I was never like super into that universe myself. I just kind of enjoyed like younger sibling watching my older sibling play it.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, you do have to keep in mind that every Final Fantasy universe, like 1 through 15 now, it's self-contained. Yeah, they're all separate universes. The only exception to that rule is kind of Final Fantasy 14, because we've already established multiple things about multiverses and
Well,
stuff
yeah,
like
you
that.
keep the same like aeons and everything within there.
Yeah, you keep a lot of the same flavor as far as like the various god type entities and the various means of combat, and the various like cool and interesting dichotomy between like technology and magic that Final Fantasy always has, which is one of the things that always just drawn me to the series, because I always love that you can have big giant robots shooting laser beams, but some total BA with an axe can totally bring down that robot.
It's also kind of just nice that within the World of Warcraft universe, it'd be much easier to hop back into things, because while we'll talk about this in another series, the lore isn't all very consistent. Sometimes it kind of is accidentally, situationally, but at the same time, it's like they haven't drastically changed a lot of like professions and raid mechanics, and while they keep messing with like rotations for different specs and things like that, it's not significantly different enough from patch to patch that you can't kind of just hop right back into it if you miss one here or there.
Yeah.
And while some people enjoy completely re-immersing themselves and learning all the mechanics and the workings of new universes, just because of time-wise, it'd be easier for me to hop into something else where I'm like, I can kind of come in and leave and still be kind of the same place.
I mean,
and from like spells and skills, it wouldn't be really hard for me to learn new classes as I go, just because a lot of the times the rotations for like all those kinds of things are very similar, and if you understand how like boss fight mechanics and how spell mechanics work, it's kind of easy to, you know, superimpose what you know how things should work and just be like, I understand how to do that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, while you're correct, and that's one of the reasons that it's relatively easy to get back into the same game. Final Fantasy XIV, for all its great things that it's done correctly and stuff, it is just your classic MMO with the exact same UI and the exact same setup as every other MMO like it.
That's
Which means
true. I'm not trying to hate on Final Fantasy
No,
14.
you're totally fine.
I'm just trying to justify where I'm at with the game, having only played obviously not terribly much of it, considering I didn't fully make it out of the
starting
the
level
starting
area.
levels.
But my point being here is that, like, even though all the abilities go by different names and all the classes go by different names, you really only have DPS, tank, and healer. And
I'm more talking about, like you were talking about, like the crafting systems and the economic market setup you briefly told me about, where you can kind of sell things within different.
oh yeah, so I mean,
Like the
it's
Grand
just,
Exchange, the auction house for whatever World of Warcraft and RuneScape.
yeah.
Like
I mean,
that
every
version of it.
MMO has an auction house, and they all work fairly similarly. Although I do think that people have the most trouble using the auction house in Final Fantasy that I've seen so far.
It's just the interesting because you said you can kind of sell in like different market zones for things.
Yeah.
Is that how that
So
works?
each city has its own tax, and so if you have your retainer staying at, say, Limsa Luminsa, they're going to charge a different tax depending on where the person that buys their stuff.
And
So
also from where you contact your retainer.
yeah,
So if you are in Britannia and your retainer's in Limsa, then you'll get charged a tax when the item sells. And then if somebody buys that from Moldav, they'll get charged a tax when they buy your item. But then if they bought it from Limsa, where your retainer is, you would get taxed, but they wouldn't. And if you posted it from Limsa, they would get taxed if they were still in Ul'dah, but you wouldn't. And if everyone's in Limsa, then there's no tax.
yeah. So it's the idea of that is just a money sink.
Yeah.
It's there's nothing particularly special about it. I would like to see them eventually just merge the markets from across the worlds, because it would increase selection, I think, a lot, and I think the markets would be really wild for a while, but I think they'd level out and find a stride.
So
and
when you say from across the worlds, are you talking about all
across the realms?
miscellaneous
Yeah.
realms?
So like you have Bolmog and Adamantois and all those guys. Right now, they're all their separate markets.
Okay, yeah, they I believe they did something. Don't quote me on that. In World of Warcraft, where they have like groups, where they have certain realms that all share within one.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. That sounds right to me.
I know for a fact that's how it works for the PvP system. Is they have
Yeah, the battle
PvP
groups.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be it would be really nice because it would broaden things within that market.
Yeah, and I mean the market is actually pretty. I wouldn't say crowded, but it's pretty full, even just in the one server. So they may not ever actually move that direction, but I think it'd be interesting personally. But back to my point is that, like, you know, in all these MMOs, you really only have those three classes as far as like combat classes go, and so even though all the abilities names are different, the class names are different, it's still really just the same concepts going into each one. Final Fantasy does a pretty good job at throwing their own kind of curveball into each class and making it feel different, while basically giving everybody the same abilities, really. Like, like Ninja works very different than you know, Monk, and Monk works very different than Summoner, and Summoner works very different, etc., etc. But really, they're all just there to deal damage and use their what limited utility they may or may not have, depending on the class. But that's what always has attracted me to the more utility-based classes. Like an example here is Red Mage, above level, I think 64. They get Raise, they get Cure. So like, if it really gets wild, like I can start raising people really easily. I can throw out some heals if necessary, while also still throwing off a decent amount of damage, just because of the way that class works. I mean, I get real busy and it gets pretty nuts, but but it's doable. So you know, like each class is going to play a little bit different, and unfortunately, you don't really get a flavor for like how a class works in Final Fantasy XIV. I would say until you get almost to level 30, and really until you get to like level 40 or so, because at level 30 is when you pick up most jobs, and then at level 40, by the time you hit level 40, you're kind of well invested in that job. And you can kind of start seeing kind of how the class comes together. It's too bad you didn't have a little bit more time to spend on it, because really, like, it took our friend Zach, 3 days to get from level 9 to 40.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, it's with those kinds of games, I kind of like to take my time, because I like to read the quests logs and everything, and actually, like, when you're going on to like a secondary character after you've like mained a first one and everything, yeah, you can kind of speed through, because you're like, I've kind of done most of this before. I'm not trying to learn things for new. But as a new player, I'm like, I really enjoy trying to immerse myself into the game itself.
And I mean,
and Zach definitely did, because he was talking to us about a bunch of the plot stuff.
Yeah.
But,
so one thing that some of the patches have done is they've upped the rewards a lot of the core story quests. So the fastest way to level is just to do the story. So you can get a lot of you can get all the story elements you need to understand what's going on in the game and in the world through the main quest, and without ever having to touch any side quests, really. Like, there's a few spots here and there where you're going to have to, like, hit a few fates or hit a few, side quests, which just happens, and that's okay too. But, like, overall, you can pretty much just push the main story and be good. That's been my experience every single time I've come back to the game after a long break. I think the longest break I took was 2 years at one point, and we hopped right back in, Zill and I, and just burned through Heaven's Word until, and we basically completed all of Heaven's Word and a few other odds and ends the day before the expansion dropped, or something crazy like that, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, and then we took another break.
Yeah.
Right after it dropped because of school.
Yeah, I think we got a little bit of playtime in maybe, but yeah, it was definitely school started and we took another big break.
Yeah.
It was a few months. But
I just know from growing up on WoW that was like, I really enjoyed trying to level or get all the side quests and everything while pushing it, because unlike the Final Fantasy version where you could come back and do all those sides as a different spec, and the difficulty would be maintained. Coming back as like a level 80 trying to do like level 20 quests.
It's just hyper unrewarding.
It was easy, but yeah, it was really unrewarding, because you're like, I didn't really earn anything out of this, which is a bonus to Final Fantasy XIV. That's a really great idea.
Yeah,
the concept of scaling, which WoW eventually kind of gets to with the time walking dungeons at one point, where it's like they drop all of your gear score and everything, but it's like it doesn't apply to like normal quest chains, so it's like it just it wasn't as fun.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't actually scale your like primary classes down to whatever overworld level there is on Final Fantasy. I kind of wish that you could. Like, if you joined back up on the game and Kitty and I were in a party with you, I wish I could hit sync to the lowest person in my party, and I would sync down. But
you can take your secondary, your other
but
classes,
I can take one of my other classes,
and you could totally do it. Whereas in WoW, it was like, your specs didn't matter.
Yeah.
Your specs all leveled at an even rate. You could swap whenever you wanted.
But yeah, so like I think my lowest level class right now is Conjurer. So I could definitely roll around with you as my Conjurer. Yeah, that's definitely one thing I love about Final Fantasy. If I get bored of fighting monsters as my warrior, I can go play Red Mage. If I get bored of both of those, I can go be a monk for a while.
Yeah, and all the time you've invested into that character, it doesn't feel like wasted, because I know from a WoW perspective, it really sucked when you're like, I sunk a lot of time and effort into that druid, but if I want to try something different, I now kind of had to start from scratch. Now, granted, that was kind of solved where they made, like, mounts and everything account bound, so you didn't have to be like, I worked really hard to get like the Phoenix mount from Nexus, is that what it was?
I don't know, to be honest
Which
with you.
Phoenix?
Red Phoenix. Ashes of Alar.
Yeah. Oh, that's from the raid.
Tempest Keep?
I think.
Anyways, if you spent a lot of time to get a rare mount like that, and then you made an alt account, you're like, oh, well, I got that on a different account. I can't show off this thing I worked really hard to get. But with the making mounts and trinkets and toys and all that kind of stuff, account mounted, solved that a little bit. At the same time, it's just like Final Fantasy has a much nicer setup when it comes to that, where you can have multiple classes for one character.
Yeah, and then you can, like, if while you're in the queue on Dark Knight, you're like, I want to go level my botanist, you can just do that. And then you can also take it to, like, if you want to go level your dancer, you can also do that. You don't have to, like, switch characters to go do that. You don't have to wait until you're out of the queue. And then also, WoW had the heirlooms, but Final Fantasy, you just have all the same gear. So if you're at level cap and you got all of your white mage gear and now you want to try scholar, you just have that gear.
Yeah. Yeah, so all the healing gear is all healing gear, so all the healers share it, more or less. There's a few pieces.
Yeah. The weapons don't carry across because that's how you choose your job.
The weapons don't carry across, and there's certain specific set pieces that don't carry across. Like, every class has their level 50 pin ultimate. I've completed all my class quest gear. And a few other odds and ends like that. But overall, all the spellcaster damage dealers share the same stuff. All the melee DPSers share the same stuff.
What? It wasn't fun waiting and hoping that the boss drops your specific class set of gear?
Yeah.
That was so enjoyable when you see, like, 3 Death Knight items drop from one thing and there's, like, 1 Death Knight in the group.
Yeah, no,
And then the paladin needs on it.
I did that
Always
with my shaman. I was trying to get the Wind Fairy axe, and I must have ran the dungeon that it dropped in, I don't know, at least 50 times, probably more. But I'm going to go with, like, 50 as probably a low number. But I ran it for, like, multiple times a day for almost a month, like, running it 3 to 5, maybe 8 times a day sometimes, depending on whether or not I had to work or school or whatever. And, yeah, it was miserable. And by the time I got it, I was so overleveled for it that it wasn't even an upgrade anymore. But it was principal at that point.
Disenchanted it on the spot.
I did not. I actually wielded it almost just because. Because it was really cool. At the time, it was, it had the Wind Fairy proc, and then you could also have Wind Fairy proc on you, and they stacked. So you could Wind Fury and then Wind Fury, and then those Wind Furies would Wind Fury, and it got really really obnoxious.
And then someone hits you with that dispel.
Yeah. That's, yeah, anyway, I mean, that's, you have any other thoughts you'd like to add to your experience with Final Fantasy? Or Reggae?
No, I think I've said my piece on this one.
I've said my piece. How about you? Alright. Well, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and all that YouTube jazz, guys.
And hit the bell button.
Yeah, we super duper appreciate it. Cheers.